All right, Governor, let's just get to it. Whirlwind day, whirlwind session. Give me your top priorities of the upcoming legislature session.
Well, I mean, we're going to keep on building on the successes that we've seen before, where we've now had in the past 2 years the fastest drops in violent crime anywhere in the United States of America. Some of the fastest growth in teachers by being able to eliminate by half the teacher shortage and teacher vacancies. And we've also now seen how, whether it's Samsung Biologics making their first investment in the United States in Maryland, and also things like AstraZeneca, which has had the largest private sector investment in the history of the state of Maryland, and which is going to add over 2,600 jobs. So this session, we're going to build upon the successes we've had before, and that's how to make Maryland more affordable, how to make Maryland more economically competitive, and also how to make sure we're protecting our people from the type of damage that we're seeing from Washington, D.C.
One of the things that we have to talk about is another deficit. It's about a 1.4, 1.5 so far looking like deficit between the revenues. We've been talking to Marylanders, and about 69, 68% say they feel like they're overtaxed in the state. So I was wondering, how do you bridge that gap, that revenue, without dipping into, and they mostly don't really see a difference between taxes or fees when we've talked to them. How do you bridge that gap without reaching into the pockets of Marylanders?
Well, I think we have to make sure that that's how the budget is going to be laid out, and that's the budget that I'll present is going to have no new taxes, no new fees, and that will also couple on the fact that last year we actually gave the middle class a tax cut. I agree with those Marylanders, and particularly when you think about for our state has needed cuts 18 of the past 21 years in order to balance the budget. There is a structural problem with the way that Maryland's budget has always just historically been done. And so that's why when you look at our budget, we are going to, for the fourth year in a row, decrease the size of the general fund. So decrease the size of Maryland's budget, because I think we need to be able to do more with less, and we need to still continue to make strategic investments while not asking the taxpayer to be able to pay more. So I agree with many Marylanders, and that's exactly the approach that I've taken with this budget and the exactly approach that I've taken throughout my time as governor.
One of the things about affordability, and you were very instrumental in pushing this forward last year, and you've started a task force as well, energy utility prices. Maryland has the highest, according to Newsweek, utility prices across the board. Many folks who are sort of in that sector of investments for energy say, hey, this is a generation problem Maryland has of generating energy. What are you looking at to generate more electricity in Maryland so that it can bring prices down? And what can conceivably be done during this session?
Yeah, I mean, and the generation problem in Maryland has been generational. Yeah. This is something that Maryland has been battling this issue for a very, very long time, and it's something that we need to get serious about. And you're absolutely right. It's the reason why, in addition to the rebates that we provided last year to Maryland taxpayers, we're again going to be introducing legislation that's going to focus on these rising costs of energy. It's the reason that we continue pushing that Maryland should be generating more in-state energy, and also that clean energy options are not just the cheapest, but the fastest way to increase measurements of supply, which is going to help to drive down prices. And so you are going to see, with the way we're going to focus on, is how can we speed up generation, how can we really force PJM, who is really the regional grid operator with all these oil execs on their board, to say that you cannot continue hosing the people of Maryland and jacking up prices on them while you're continuing to make the utilities happy by constraining supply. We've got to be able to fix that dynamic.
Is there any, I don't know the answer to this, but I've seen some of the utilities saying we'd like to generate energy again. Like previously, I think it was Exelon said this. Any thought into how that could change, or could that be something considered?
Well, yeah, because I think part of the way we're going to be able to generate more energy is to add more energy options. The reason that I've said that we believe in this all of the above approach when it comes to energy, that it needs to include solar and wind and nuclear, that has to be added to the fact that we have natural gas supplies and other supplies, but by adding clean energy options, you're going to increase supply. By increasing supply, you're going to then be able to address the demand, which is going to drive down prices. So I agree with them. I just think we need to open up the aperture as the type of energy options that the ratepayers can rely on.
It's also, generation's hard to get done. Do you see anything foreseeable that can be done to bring prices down this year for folks?
Yeah, so there are things that we are working on right now to actually bring prices down. I am beyond frustrated when you're watching an average Marylander who continues to watch their bill go up and not understand why. So there are things that we can and we will do that we are going to have to work with our not just federal partners, but also have to work with our regulators, because that's really where these jackups in prices are continuing to sustain, but also increase more generation, more options for that generation, which will increase the energy assets that we have.
You've always talked about it last year, and I think people are pretty well on the record you are about this, about growing the economy of Maryland. You've put forward a few proposals. How do you see that playing out? What do you see the way to grow Maryland's economy? Because there are, many, and I get it, they're a bit biased. They say, Maryland's the 45th most competitive state for bringing business in tax-wise. Where do you see changing that narrative or bringing businesses into Maryland?
Well, I would say the narrative is already changing. I mean, when you look at Samsung Biologics, which is the largest biotech company in Korea, that made their first investment in the United States in the state of Maryland. When you're looking at the recent announcement around AstraZeneca, which is now going to bring over 2,600 jobs to the state of Maryland, we're seeing this is already changing. Since I've been governor, there have been over 35,000 new businesses started in Maryland or that have chosen to move to the state of Maryland, 100,000 new jobs. We just have to keep the momentum going. And part of the way we keep the momentum going is we've got to diversify off of Washington, D.C. We need to focus on these new industries, these lighthouse industries like aerospace and defense and life sciences and IT. And we have to make it easier for businesses to grow here. Regulatory reform, permitting reform, incentivizing businesses to choose the state of Maryland. If we can do that, we're actually going to continue rising in national ranking when it comes to places where people want to do business.
Yeah, and 25,000 jobs lost from the federal cuts. How do you see this new agenda, or not new, but let's say this expansion of your agenda playing into keeping those Marylanders who lost their jobs in Maryland?
Well, there's been no state that's been hit harder by these federal cuts and these federal attacks than the state of Maryland. You're right, 25,000 jobs in Maryland, federal jobs, that's more than any other state inside this country. Now, I think what's been really important is that Maryland's unemployment rate right now at 4.2% is still well below the national average, despite being hit harder than any other state on the federal cuts. The reason? It's the private sector. The private sector is investing in Maryland. The private sector is hiring that talent. And so the thing that I will continue to see is we want to incentivize our private sector partners to be able to leverage our talent. We will continue providing opportunities for our federal workers, things like our Feds to Eds initiative, which is getting federal workers into the classroom as educators and teachers. We're going to continue thinking creatively about ways to be able to support our people because it's working so far, and we just need to keep that momentum going.
One question of will it come up this session? You've been talking about redistricting as a bulwark against the Trump administration, but also talking about fair maps and looking at that. Senate President is opposed to it. He says that there's a chance, and he thinks it's a pretty fair one, that those maps could be thrown out if there are new ones, and then we could have a map where you would see more Republicans coming in. How do you sort of square that circle of the legal error, the legal space there, but also with what you want to accomplish?
Well, I think part of the reason why I did the Governor's Redistricting Advisory Council, which is a bipartisan commission that has been spending these past months listening to Marylanders, is exactly for that reason, that we want to have Marylanders' inputs, not the inputs of the Trump administration and not the inputs of pundits, but actually listen to Marylanders about how do they see fair maps happening. This is something that happens at the end of every decade, but since Donald Trump has decided that he's going to start picking and choosing which states are going to do it mid-decade, my point is then Maryland should go through our own process during the mid-decade as well. And so the commission is completing their work. They'll make their recommendations. We'll see where their recommendations lay out. And then at that point, it will be up to the General Assembly to let democracy flourish, and then they should have a vote to determine where their members think that those maps should lie.
2 years in, we didn't see large deficits. Now we're here with a large deficit. What have you learned over the last, I would say, 4 years? I'm sure every day is something new, right? It's a job that it comes with different things of working with the General Assembly. What have you learned over the last, let's say, 3 sessions that you're going to apply or that you think is very helpful in this most recent session?
Well, I'd say we have had deficits. I mean, I walked in with a structural deficit. We've had structural deficits, and it wasn't just something that my predecessor dealt with. This is something my predecessors have dealt with. For the past 21 years, Maryland has needed cuts in 18 of them. So this is not a unique problem for our administration. Frankly, it's not a unique problem for my predecessor. This has been a Maryland phenomenon for a generation now. And we've got to be able to break it, because we've got to get away from this formula-based budgeting and actually do results-based budgeting. That's why you see in our budget, this is now the fourth year in a row, that I've actually decreased the size of the general fund. And so decrease the size of the Maryland state budget, but saying we still have to make targeted investments in things like public safety, in things like public education, in things like creating more housing and creating more economic opportunities for people in the state. And so I still do believe that Maryland has a structural issue that we have got to address, because while I inherited a structural deficit, my intention is for my successor 5 years from now, they will not have to inherit the same thing I do inherit.
What do you hope to say to Marylanders on Sine Die this year? What is the message you hope comes across that they see in the budget you present and the work you do with the legislature?
I would say Marylanders are going to see how that I'm locked in. We're focused. We're focused on making our state more affordable. We're focused on making our state more competitive. We're focused on protecting our people. That despite what we are seeing from Washington, D.C., despite this onslaught that we are seeing on Maryland and so many other places, that we understood the assignment, and that this administration and this state in this moment will continue to rise to the occasion.
Yes?